Remember that video where I sort of ruined the space elevator? If you haven't seen it, it basically explains why it's not only impossible, but also extremely dangerous. If you want to know why, click here. It's only 3.5 minutes long, but self-promotion aside, it's time to do it again, and this time I'll be ruining the Space Shuttle. Now these videos are pretty negative, but don't get me wrong, I love space. I just want to see space done right, and that's not what I see when I look at the space elevator and the Space Shuttle. If you ever watch a special about the Space Shuttle, you might notice that people talk about it like it was built out of pure American spirit. They like to talk about how it was an inspiration for a generation and stuff like that. Now I'm not here to claim that it wasn't inspiring for people, I'm just going to talk about whether it really deserves this reputation. So why did people like the shuttle so much? Well, I'm willing to bet part of it is that it looks cool. Well, relatively. I mean, how inspiring can a little cone-shaped capsule be? Okay, well, for a space nut like me, it's pretty cool. But to the general public, a sleek, aerodynamic design looks much more like a proper spaceship. And yeah, I think a spaceplane looks pretty cool, but it's the fact that it's a spaceplane that made the shuttle one of the worst spaceships ever. And don't worry, I have facts to back that claim up. Firstly, why was it a spaceplane? Well, it was reusable, of course. Anyone can tell you that. And for the time, a plane was probably the best option for a reusable spacecraft. But it did bring challenges along with it. A plane is a lot harder to launch into space than a symmetrical little cone. This is because the shuttle was effectively loaded onto the side of another full-sized rocket, and it took a lot of work to keep this balance. If they didn't, well, look no further than Kerbal Space Program to see what would happen. To balance the rocket, there were several steps they could take. They could change the shape of the solid rocket boosters in order to adjust their thrust. That's a fairly simple trick, and even some rocket hobbyists do it. They also took advantage of gimbal, which, if you don't know, is basically mounting the engines on a ball and socket joint like your shoulder. By turning the engines on this joint, they could control the spacecraft and keep it from flipping out. But there was another thing they had to do to keep the shuttle stable. Since it was a massive cargo plane, it was designed to be heavily loaded, carrying up to 60,000 pounds. But there were flights where it carried much less. So much less, in fact, that the engines alone couldn't keep it stable. So what did they do, you ask? They put ballast on it. That's right, the thing they used to sink submarines. They stuck it on the shuttle. They even used the crew as ballast. If there was a particularly heavy cargo, they would reduce the crew, not because it was too much weight for the shuttle to lift, but because it threw off the center of gravity. All of this just because they were trying to reuse a spaceplane. And that isn't even the end of it. Oh no, not even close. But while we're on the topic, let's talk about reusability. See that massive orange tank? That's almost as famous as the orbiter itself. Those tanks cost about $43 million a piece, and they were never recovered. To be fair, the cost of the shuttle was in the billions, but that's still a lot of money. But at least they were recovering the boosters, right? Well, I have more bad news. They were relatively simple and cheap to produce, and since they were landing in saltwater, they had to be refurbished anyway. I couldn't find an exact cost, but most people thought they weren't saving any money by recovering them. And if they were saving money, it was just a small amount. So really, the orbiter was the only thing worth reusing anyway. But forget how inefficient it is. You can forgive that. The one thing that is not forgivable is the fact that the shuttle was the most deadly spacecraft of all time. There have only been 18 deaths during space flights. Guess how many were caused by the shuttle? 14. And that wasn't just bad luck. Both of the shuttle's accidents had to do with the shuttle's design. The easiest one to argue is Columbia. If you don't remember, this was when a piece of insulation fell off of the tank and struck the orbiter's wing. The only reason this could happen was because the shuttle was on the side of the tank, not on top like a normal capsule. In fact, these strikes were so common that NASA disregarded it, since most were too small to do much damage. In the wake of this tragedy, NASA did make some changes. They began inspecting the wings in space and training to repair them. What changes did they make to the shuttle? They started to research better seats and seat belts. There was no way to really prevent a strike because it was just a side effect of the shuttle's design. But the shuttle's other accident, Challenger, was a little different. The issue originated in the solid rocket booster. However, this wasn't really the shuttle's fault, right? Well, the explosion wasn't, but I believe the deaths were. For a shuttle to abort, the orbiter must detach from the assembly and glide to a runway, a pretty complex maneuver. In fact, Challenger was forced to do this on a previous mission. The problem is that it has no real parachute, so if it's damaged, it isn't likely that it will be able to land safely. In the Challenger disaster, the shuttle was torn apart. The airtight crew module actually survived in one piece, but without its wings, it couldn't land safely. If they had a capsule, not only would they have been more out of the way of the blast, they also would have had a parachute to deploy and save them. Just look at the SpaceX explosion that happened last year. The rocket exploded violently, but the capsule survived, and probably could have parachuted safely to the ground if it had been programmed to abort. Now, I'm a fairly patriotic American, and I know it's dangerous to criticize something that is considered by many to be a symbol of our country, but when it's as inefficient and downright deadly as the shuttle, I think we should avoid letting our pride get the better of us. We should stop mourning the loss of the shuttle and get busy building something better. But anyway, that's all for this episode of Ruining Space. I think these are some of my favorite videos, so please like, comment, subscribe, and share to spread awareness of the cosmic death blunder. I'm Con Hathy. Bye.